After detailed detective work, experts now believe this is the only surviving piece of clothing worn by Elizabeth I.
They finally opened the data everyone was afraid to touch. Using advanced AI and newly recovered genetic fragments attributed to Queen Elizabeth I, researchers reconstructed what was happening inside her body during her final months. Her final symptoms, long dismissed as age and decline, now suggest deliberate biological interference. And once the pattern became clear, even historians were forced to admit something terrifying. The truth had been hiding in her body all along. The forbidden experiment. The warning arrived before any work began. A source inside Westminster Abbey sent a message: stop. The Queen's tomb was sealed for a reason that had nothing to do with respect or tradition. Disturbing her genetic code would threaten national security. The team, funded by anonymous backers through hidden companies, ignored it. Then a second warning came. Some bloodlines must not be reopened. Inside the project, new questions began to form. These questions came from the AI team. Argus, the artificial intelligence system that would carry out the analysis, was not created for historical study. Internal emails revealed that Argus had been used on old remains from secret British expeditions. These expeditions had discovered unusual skeletons. The public never learned about these finds. The AI was built to find abnormalities in ancient DNA. As soon as work began, the team used it for Elizabeth, even though they did not fully understand what Argus had been trained to detect. The first warning from the machine came fast. Before any analysis began, Argus scanned a list of Tudor artifacts and marked several of them as sensitive materials. This shocked the team. The AI should not have been able to judge sensitivity. The only way it could do this was if someone had programmed it to avoid certain genetic patterns. From that moment on, the team knew they were in real danger. They felt that Argus might reveal information that modern governments still keep hidden. They feared the truth buried inside Elizabeth's DNA. And as soon as they began collecting the first samples, they learned that something in Queen Elizabeth's biological material was wrong from the very beginning. The DNA that should not exist. The first physical samples the team collected were supposed to be simple confirmations. They expected clean hair fragments, clean skin cells, and a clean seal impression. Instead, the very first object they examined proved something was deeply wrong. The locket ring that Elizabeth carried everywhere held not one hair, but two. The first hair matched Elizabeth. The second hair did not match anyone in the royal line. It did not match any known servant. It did not match any historical figure connected to her. It belonged to another female, and no one could explain how that second hair had been sealed inside an object that was supposed to hold only the Queen's own memories. The shock increased when the team used forensic spectral analysis. The hinge inside the locket contained dried blood that could not be seen with the eye but appeared clearly under laboratory equipment. This blood was not placed where a person would normally cut themselves. It was located deep in the hinge where accidental contact was impossible. This showed the locket had been used for a purpose other than being worn as jewelry. It had been opened and used to store something that required secrecy. The position of the blood proved someone handled the locket in a careful and intentional way. The ring had been turned into a hidden container at some point in the past. Whatever had been stored inside it was meant to stay hidden and never be discovered. The gloves were even more disturbing. They looked normal on the surface. Under the microscope, the truth became clear. The inside of the gloves held multiple layers of skin cells from different people. These layers were stacked on top of one another in a way that could never happen naturally. This showed that the gloves had been taken apart and reassembled at different times. It showed that the original interior had been removed. It also showed that new materials had been added long after Elizabeth's death. This proved that someone had interfered with the gloves on purpose. Someone wanted to change the biological evidence inside them. This was not caused by age or wear. It was controlled tampering meant to hide or confuse any future genetic study. The wax seal on the diplomatic letter Elizabeth sent to the King of France in the late 1580s should have been the safest sample. The letter discussed trade rights and military cooperation, and it had been stored for centuries in the French National Archives as part of their royal correspondence collection. The research team received temporary access to it through a formal request for historical study. Elizabeth sealed this letter with her thumbprint to prove it came directly from her, which trapped tiny skin cells inside the wax. Under electron microscopy, the seal showed thin scratches that proved someone had scraped off the original surface and added new wax on top. These marks were extremely old. They came from a time close to her life or shortly after her death. This meant the tampering did not happen recently. It happened when someone feared the seal contained biological evidence that needed to be removed before anyone could discover it. The team attempted to obtain more items from museums. Several museums suddenly pulled access at the last moment. They said there had been previous sampling events. This was a careful way of saying that unknown individuals had already taken genetic material without permission. No records existed to explain who took these samples or why. This meant someone long before Argus had already tried to uncover or hide something in Elizabeth's DNA. When Argus ran the first contamination scans, the results were alarming. The system detected genetic signatures that did not match any Tudor, any Boleyn, or any known person from the 16th century. At first, the team feared the items were fakes. They thought they had been fooled. They ran the data again. The same result appeared. The contamination came from people who showed strange genetic anomalies that matched the anomalies in Elizabeth's own DNA. This made it clear that the contamination was not random. It was not accidental. It came from individuals who shared the same hidden biological traits. This forced the team to ask a question that none of them were prepared to face. Had someone in history tried to confuse or erase Elizabeth's true biological trail? Had there been a plan to bury the truth long before AI existed? Once Argus assembled the surviving fragments, it began to model her genome. What emerged looked so unnatural that the team thought the system had broken. Early medical tampering and biological manipulation. When the team began reconstructing Elizabeth's genome, they expected normal results for a woman born in the 16th century. Instead, Argus flagged entire sections of her chromosomes as statistically impossible, occurring at rates below 1 in 10 million in natural populations. These sections did not match any known genetic pattern from European people of her time. The sequences looked altered in a way that suggested outside interference. The AI showed that the affected regions behaved as if they had been blocked, weakened, or replaced during her earliest development. The only way this could have happened is if someone around her infancy used strong herbal compounds or early medical practices that influenced how her cells divided. These treatments could have interfered with the growth of certain traits and forced her developing body to follow an unnatural path. This finding pushed the team toward the idea that someone had changed her biology deliberately at the very beginning of her life. As the reconstruction continued, the pattern became clearer. The genome showed signs that resembled mosaicism, which is when different cells in the same body have different genetic information. Mosaicism can happen naturally, but the version in Elizabeth's genome did not match natural cases. Argus found a structure that looked shaped by outside influence. This suggested that the interference aimed to control how her body would develop as she aged. In her era, any sign of physical ambiguity at birth would have caused severe political danger. The Tudor dynasty depended on clear succession, and any trait that appeared unusual or masculine in a female heir could have been seen as a threat to the crown. This gave the court a powerful reason to act. The interference may have been done to protect her place in the royal family by hiding traits that could have exposed her genetic condition. The AI's findings pointed toward a calculated effort to make her appear normal and safe in the public eye. Argus then detected abrupt digital gaps in several developmental genes. These gaps looked like missing code. It was as if whole pieces of genetic information had been removed or silenced. These missing areas affected traits connected to physical development. Argus flagged them as signs of intentional suppression. This opened a disturbing possibility. Someone may have tried to prevent certain physical features from appearing. The gaps appeared at points that would influence body shape, facial structure, and other visible traits. The most troubling results came from her hormone-related genes. Argus found unusual shifts in the sequences that control how the body responds to hormones. These shifts did not match natural changes. They looked like long-term reactions to external compounds. During the 16th century, physicians and herbalists used strong mixtures made from plants such as monkshood, mercury compounds, and crushed roots. These mixtures were believed to correct or balance the body. It is possible that someone gave Elizabeth such treatments as an infant. The goal may have been to suppress masculine traits that appeared at birth. This finding matched a source that historians have ignored for many years. A midwife from the Tudor court left a testimony that described a child born with ambiguity that the court must never speak of again. Historians dismissed this as rumor. Argus gave it new weight. The genome showed interference at the exact points that would have shaped early physical identity. This suggested the midwife may have recorded an event that the royal family desperately wanted to hide. As Elizabeth grew older, the genetic anomalies became stronger. This told Argus that the interference did not stop in childhood. It continued into adolescence. The court physicians may have given her powerful chemical treatments to force her body into a more expected feminine appearance. These would have been dangerous and painful. They also would have left permanent biological marks. The reconstruction showed scars at the genetic level. These scars could only be seen now with modern AI. These findings revealed the earliest known case of forced biological concealment in royal history. They showed that Elizabeth's body was shaped by human hands before she ever ruled England. But even this was only the surface. When Argus studied her physical genome markers, it uncovered the most destabilizing secret of all, a discovery that reshaped her entire identity as the Virgin Queen. The biological truth that defined her entire reign. When Argus reached the section of Elizabeth's genome that controls sexual development, the system found a cluster of mutations that matched androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is known as AIS, a condition occurring in approximately 1 in 20,000 births where a person is genetically male but develops a female appearance because the body cannot respond to male hormone. However, Argus saw something even more unusual. The genome did not match standard AIS cases. It showed extra irregularities that suggested another layer of interference. This indicated that the condition had been altered or intensified by early medical treatments. These treatments may have been given by court physicians who wanted to suppress any traits that could reveal the truth. Argus then analyzed the genes connected to reproductive development. The findings were even more troubling. The AI showed that Elizabeth's reproductive system was not only underdeveloped, but also showed signs of surgical tampering. This meant that someone may have altered her anatomy in infancy to make sure her condition could never be discovered. The interference would have focused on the external genital area and possibly the internal structures that shape reproductive organs. The purpose would have been to reshape or remove any tissue that revealed her biological condition and to create a body that appeared typical to anyone who examined her later in life. In the 16th century, surgeons worked with very limited knowledge and basic tools. They used knives and heated metal instruments and relied on herbal mixtures to numb pain or slow bleeding. These procedures were extremely dangerous, but they were still physically possible when the patient was an infant. The motive would have been clear. Any visible sign of her true biological condition would have put her life in danger, since the Tudor court would not accept a future monarch with a body that did not match strict expectations. To understand how far the cover-up reached, the team analyzed Elizabeth's portraits. Argus compared many paintings from different stages of her life. The AI detected small but repeated changes made by court artists. Her jawline appeared softened in later portraits. Her shoulders were made narrower. Her fingers were lengthened in ways that did not match the actual proportions seen in surviving records of her gloves and rings. In the 16th century, court artists were expected to follow strict instructions from the palace. They did not paint what they saw. They painted what they were told to show. The Queen's image was controlled as tightly as her public speeches. Artists often received detailed notes on how to shape the face, body, and hands to present the correct appearance. They were required to erase traits that might raise questions and to create features that suggested ideal femininity. Court clothing records added even more evidence. Elizabeth ordered a large number of padded corsets, reinforced bodices, and heavy layered gowns. These pieces were not standard fashion choices. They were designed to hide any asymmetry in the torso or any surgical scars that might raise questions. Women at court did wear structured clothing, but the quantity and strength of Elizabeth's garments went far beyond what was normal. This showed that the palace worked constantly to control her appearance. Critics now believe her refusal to marry, which many historians saw as a political strategy, now appears to be something else. It was a matter of survival. If she had married, she would have been expected to consummate the marriage. This would have exposed her condition immediately. Under Tudor religious law, this could have led to accusations of deception, fraud, or even blasphemy. The discovery would have ended her reign and possibly cost her life. Her speeches also took on new meaning. When she said she had the heart and stomach of a king, many believed it was a statement of strength. With this new information, critics argue the statement reads like a hidden truth. She was a woman who lived with knowledge about her own body that she could never reveal. Her isolation, strict control of her image, and fear of private contact were not signs of vanity. They were survival tactics for a monarch who understood that exposure of her biology would destroy everything she had built. But her genetic crisis was only the beginning. The next revelation did more than alter her personal story. It shattered the foundations of the Tudor dynasty itself. The bloodline collapse. When Argus reached the part of Elizabeth's genome that should have matched the Tudor male line, the system showed a result that shocked the entire team. There was no match. There was not even a distant alignment. Argus compared Elizabeth's DNA against every confirmed Tudor marker. The results were absolute. No Tudor male contributed to her DNA. This meant she was not the biological daughter of King Henry VIII. Her entire public identity as a Tudor princess collapsed in one scan. Instead, the genome pointed to a different aristocratic bloodline. This bloodline belonged to a noble family that had a long and hostile history with Henry VIII. They fought over land, political influence, and key court positions. Their disputes were public and often bitter. The AI findings suggested that Elizabeth may have been conceived during a private relationship between her mother and a man from this rival family. This raised the possibility that her birth occurred under intense political tension and may not have been accidental. It may have been the result of a private affair that threatened the king's authority. When the research team looked for historical records to support the genetic findings, they discovered something more disturbing. Recently digitalized court logs from the period of Elizabeth's birth contained several missing pages. These missing pages appeared at the exact time her birth was recorded. There was no official reason for their removal. The gaps were deliberate. Someone in the past made sure that key information about her birth disappeared from the record. Argus then processed a surviving midwife's letter from that time. The physical letter had been damaged and parts were unreadable. However, AI enhancement revealed faint outlines of erased writing beneath the surface. These lines included a statement that had been hidden for centuries. It read, "The father is not the king, God help us all." The midwife was the first person to see the newborn Elizabeth. Her testimony carried weight because she was present during the event. This erased line confirmed the fear that something about Elizabeth's parentage had been concealed from the beginning. Henry VIII's actions soon after Elizabeth's birth also made more sense with this new perspective. His sudden and extreme rage toward Anne Boleyn, the queen who gave birth to Elizabeth, had always seemed excessive. Many historians argued that the accusations brought against her were exaggerated or completely false. The charges included adultery with several men, incest with her own brother, and plots against the king. These accusations appeared almost impossible for one person to commit and were likely constructed to justify a rapid removal. The court arrested her, held a short and heavily controlled trial, and found her guilty within days. Her execution was shocking even by Tudor standards. She was taken to the Tower of London, forced to kneel on the scaffold, and beheaded by a hired swordsman who had been brought in from France. Witnesses said she remained calm, which made the scene even more disturbing. With the new genetic evidence, the king's behavior became clearer. If Henry discovered that the child presented to him did not carry his blood, he would have seen it as a direct attack on his dynasty. This would make his decision to remove the queen both swift and brutal. It also explains why the court moved quickly to declare the newborn Elizabeth illegitimate and unfit to inherit the throne. After Anne Boleyn's execution, Henry annulled the marriage, which meant the child from that union was no longer recognized as lawful. Parliament then passed an act that removed Elizabeth from the line of succession and marked her as illegitimate. She remained in this position for years until a later political shift restored her to the succession, although her legal status as illegitimate was never formally reversed. This created a lifelong weakness in her claim to the crown and added even more weight to the secret that her bloodline did not match the Tudor line. Elizabeth's childhood illnesses were also re-examined by Argus. Historical accounts described them as fevers and mysterious episodes of weakness. The AI reconstructed possible causes based on her genome. The symptoms suggested episodes of poisoning. The pattern matched attempts to slowly remove an unwanted heir while avoiding suspicion. Someone within the court may have tried to end her life in a way that looked natural in order to protect the Tudor succession. These discoveries changed the meaning of Elizabeth's entire reign. Her intelligence, her strategic thinking, and her powerful presence now appeared connected to deep fear. She knew that if her true parentage was exposed, her reign would collapse instantly. Every decision she made carried the weight of that secret. But even illegitimacy was not the final secret Argus exposed. The AI simulation uncovered evidence suggesting Elizabeth never died naturally. Elizabeth, the final hours. When Argus reconstructed Elizabeth's final days at the molecular level, the first conclusion was immediate and unavoidable. The symptoms recorded by her physicians did not align with lead poisoning alone. Her long-accepted historical diagnosis collapsed when tested against modern toxicological modeling. Instead, Argus identified a composite toxic signature that matched a rarely documented combination of belladonna and aconite. Both substances appear in documented poisoning methods from the period not as crude poisons, but as controlled neurological agents designed to disable while preserving awareness. Belladonna disrupts sensory processing and destabilizes respiratory rhythm. Aconite interferes with neuromuscular transmission and gradually induces paralysis. Together, they form a poison profile intended not for instant death, but for conscious physical shutdown. According to Argus, this combination would have produced exactly the symptoms recorded in court accounts of Elizabeth's final illness. Elizabeth would have first experienced an intense burning sensation in her mouth and throat. This would have been followed by progressive muscle rigidity that prevented her from voluntarily shifting her body. As the toxins spread, she would have been unable to lie down without severe physical distress. Finally, her respiratory muscles would have begun to fail, causing slow suffocation while her consciousness remained intact. Argus confirmed that lead exposure alone could not produce this precise sequence of symptoms in this order or at this speed. Only a coordinated poison profile could account for their timing, progression, and severity. In other words, if Argus's reconstruction is correct, these were not theoretical effects. These were the symptoms Elizabeth herself experienced during her final hours. The simulation then examined her reconstructed metabolism over the preceding months. What Argus found changed the interpretation of her death completely. Long before the fatal dose, the model detected repeated microdoses of the same poison combination. These amounts were too small to be lethal. Their only plausible purpose was testing. The poisoner was measuring her tolerance, her reaction speed, and her symptom onset. This was not an impulsive act. It was a controlled biological experiment carried out on a reigning monarch. Argus then cross-referenced political records from the weeks surrounding her death and identified disturbing patterns. There were sudden promotions, quiet land transfers, and coded letters written by Robert Cecil, referring to what he called a transition ensured by discretion. Historians had long interpreted the phrase as ceremonial. Argus classified it as operational language. The attendants assigned to Elizabeth's chamber during her final week were also examined. Several of them disappeared from historical records immediately afterward, without death notices, dismissals, or explanations. Argus labeled this an extreme anomaly in a period where servant movements were otherwise carefully documented. The most devastating reconstruction concerned Elizabeth's final hour. Historical accounts describe her making a repeated pointing gesture that historians later dismissed as delirium. Argus analyzed preserved motor function pathways and determined that this specific gesture could still be produced even during advanced paralysis. The AI concluded that Elizabeth was not gesturing randomly. She was attempting to identify someone in the room. According to Argus, Elizabeth likely understood that she had been poisoned. She was trying to name the person responsible. However, by that point, the toxin had already taken her voice and most of her voluntary control. She remained conscious. She remained aware. And she died trapped inside a body that could no longer obey her. Make sure to click the cards on the screen now for more interesting videos.